Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by oldschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Arun Mehta Show. Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of Casual Chats. I'm Patricia, and I'm here with Arun Mehta from the Arun Mehta Show. Welcome back, Arun.
Hooray, I'm back again.
So today we're going to be going back into musical territory because we had just celebrated Independence Day here in America. As for Aaron, it was another typical day for him, but I thought it would be really appropriate if we talk about the 2015 Broadway musical Hamilton, not only because it's Independence Day and it's about one of our founding fathers, but also just recently it was premiered on Disney Plus for more people to see. As opposed to on Broadway, which unfortunately, due to COVID-19, has been shut down and will be shut down for the remaining year.
Yeah, well, I don't know for YouTube's sake if you want to refer to it as as what Game Grumps referring it to as the Backstreet Boys reunion tour. So,
Sure,
it's selling a lot of tickets, and you don't want to be sold a ticket by a potential tickets out. I guess you could say.
Right.
I don't know. But, yeah.
Yeah, now I'm actually curious. I mean, how did you first hear about this Broadway musical?
When I was in London, because so I was walking past the Royal Albert Hall, and by the way, shout out to the Royal Albert Hall. It's in a bit of trouble at the minute, so I hope they can get through. But I was walking past that, and Hamilton was actually one of the productions I was actually there at the time. Now, one thing we got to be careful of here is that we don't want to mix and match all the Hamiltons together, if you will, because I've just been watching on the website. There's actually separate production companies actually dealing with the Hamilton musical and such. So the one I saw was the Hamilton London one, which I walked past and was interested in seeing it, but it was sold out at the time, so I was a bit disappointed because I knew that it was generating a lot of attention. But that was the London one. There's one that's also in New York, one that's in Los Angeles, there's one in Australia, and also there's the North American tour as well. Yes. So it's gone to the point where it's getting various forms at this point. Mm-hmm. And it shows how successful that this musical actually was, because not only has it had it's a great musical, it's got great acting in it, it's got great sound to it, and it entertains a lot of people. It's about a story that not many people actually are very familiar with, actually, which I found quite surprising, because it's about somebody who really would take a kind of maybe a secondary, maybe a third role, I guess, to kind of our main characters here, Thomas Jefferson and and such and such. But I think there's that to it as well. But on top of that as well, it's also having quite a significant cultural influence, I think, in in our politics and also in our society today. So it's been a phenomenon that's I think we'll be talking about for a considerable amount of time.
Oh yeah, for sure. So yeah, so the idea of it came from the man who was the one who created the musical himself. So Lin-Manuel Miranda, no relation. So it all started around when he was doing another musical that he was creating. Which I believe is the one that's actually going to be having a theatrical release, if you can believe it, in the Heights. So, In the Heights was already a Broadway show that he was known for. Although probably not. I mean, like for Broadway fans, of course, not for like the mainstream. But anyway, so yeah, while he was doing In the Heights, he had picked up a copy of the biography of Alexander Hamilton by Rob Chernow, who's a really well-known guy for writing various biographies of people. He did one for John Rockefeller, and he did one for Morgan, J.P. Morgan. So yeah, he was already pretty well known for that kind of stuff. So while he was reading it, he found it to be pretty interesting because this was a founding father that pretty much nobody talked about. Everybody talks about Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, John Hancock. They already know about those people. But what about Alexander Hamilton, the very first treasurer of the United States of America, the one who came up with various ideas that would be hugely influential for a country? And so he decided to do his own take of the story, but at the same time putting in some hip hop elements and bringing in diverse cast of people. He wanted to do it because it was basically told as what would the story of Alexander be if it was told for today's audience? Now, this isn't the first time that there has been a musical based off of the founding fathers. There was obviously 1776, which I actually did see when I was about 12 years old, and it was during a school field trip. And I also really like that play as well. It's your basic telling of the Declaration of Independence and the founding fathers getting together to break away from the British so that they can get their independent freedom. Very typical story. But what made this one stand out was not only the diverse cast and not only the hip hop music, but also the fact that it was able to generate towards a much wider audience than with what usually would be for Broadway. I mean, like, there's been like your massive Broadway hits like Les Miserables and Wicked and The Lion King and Phantom of the Opera and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, when it comes to like Broadway, I mean, there's like a niche audience that it gravitates to because there's a lot of people who don't like sitting through plays and they don't like musicals. But for people who aren't even a fan of those or even American history, they found something that they were able to gravitate to.
Well, even then, I mean, I would argue that I would say since the Lego Movie, wouldn't you argue that kind of like the big thunderous musical, even if it's either in play or in movie form, is starting to kind of like come back again? If you really think about it.
Yeah, because because they were prevalent around like the 90s, where we had like big broad musicals ever since with Disney doing like The Little Mermaid, and then the Renaissance happened, and then every single animated company tried to be big and grand and epic with their musicals, similar to what Disney did. But then it kind of died out around the 2000s, and a lot of them were using like borrowed music, kind of like what they did with Shrek. It's like, let's borrow these songs from other people. Let's not write our own. That kind of formula was starting to just die off. And then it was a combination of like, a whole bunch of musicals, were starting. I mean, musicals and Broadway were still around. They still were releasing their stuff. But for the mainstream, it's like, yeah, we don't want to listen to like music on our movies anymore. It's just been done already. But then slowly things started to happen. I mean, the big breakout was around like the late 2000s. Like we had The Producers, we had Hairspray, we had Chicago, and those kind of movies like broke into the mainstream again, and people were getting into musicals again. And then other movies such as like Mamma Mia and Nine, they kind of just like killed it. And then we started getting a big resurgence again with like, plays such as Hamilton. And then we started seeing more Broadway musicals produced for theaters, such as like another Mamma Mia movie, which, okay, sure. And then we had like The Greatest Showman and La La Land. So yeah, like that kind of stuff was just starting to come back again. And then there were so many references to Hamilton about like, oh, you have this play about, one of the founding fathers, and it's basically done in hip hop and the diverse cast, and people were talking about it. I remember when I first heard about it, it's like it was all over the news. Like people were like praising it to no end. There was documentaries of Lin-Manuel Miranda doing, behind the scenes work on Hamilton, discussing about the influences and, all the actors and all the actresses and, how they were able to get opportunities to go onto Broadway and, all that kind of stuff. It's just amazing to see,
Yeah, and you can definitely tell in Lin-Manuel Miranda's MO, I guess in his work, you can definitely tell that the Disney influence is kind of there. And I mean, he had it before anyway, because he did all the songs for Moana, and also he's done various other things like for Star Wars, The Force Awakens, and also for
Mary Poppins Returns.
Oh yeah, there was that too. Well, mind you, that's a bit of a forgettable movie, really. But I mean, his big thing before Hamilton obviously was doing Moana and also doing the Star Wars movies. So I mean, like he had a lot of influence on that. I think also the Disney aspects of things also had an influence on him, I believe, as well. And you can definitely tell in like the whole Hamilton experience. I think that in a way it does play off like something that in a way Disney would put another spin on things. Like I mean, I know it's a bad example, but Hercules, has like this whole kind of like jazz kind of like. Obviously this kind of like that. It's got its own theme, and also there's various other Disney movies that like are able to put on like, as I say, a musical type of experience, and also different ways of presenting what they have for the audience. Aladdin, obviously, for example, is obviously they've got the show tunes as well, and so in a way, I think you can see in Hamilton that Lin-Manuel Miranda, in regards to being someone who part of the creative machinery down at Disney, has obviously done his homework in regards to what people want in regards to an entertaining experience, and that's what we got here in Hamilton.
Yeah. So again, I'm just going to say it, massive spoilers ahead for Hamilton. If you have not seen it, you can see it now on Disney Plus. So unlike the last podcast when we did about Avenue Q, in which, unfortunately, it's no longer playing in Broadway, but you could actually see it. So if you do have a Disney Plus account, then stop listening to this podcast, go watch it, and then you can come back here and then hear our thoughts about it. So, yeah, the very first song that plays into the musical is probably one of the most famous ones, Alexander Hamilton. So it basically tells about his story, about how he was an orphan bastard son of a whore, and that, he went over to various places. He was born in the Leeward Islands, where his family died at a very young age. His cousin committed suicide, and he was like scraping so that he can be able to get himself on top. So he went over to Greenwich Village, and he was there in New York, and he was trying to get himself into the top. And basically, as time went on, he became a soldier for the Revolutionary War, and then eventually he became the senior aide to George Washington during the Continental Army. And so, I mean, the song is like massive. I mean, it starts off very slow with just everybody around him who would be influential with his life singing, his wife and all of his followers, and Aaron Burr, which would be the man who would shoot him at the end during their duel. By the way, I mean, that's not a spoiler. You already knew about this in American history. So
he literally says on the stage, if you didn't know this, I'm the damn fool who shot him. So,
yes, exactly.
We're gonna chuckle out of me, really, but but as someone who's kind of like new to all of this, so
yeah. So basically, the song is a great way of introducing our main character. So it has everybody singing about his life, about the struggles that he had to go through in order for him to get to where he was. And it's told from many people's perspective, not only towards Alexander himself, but also towards multiple people, his followers, his soon-to-be wife, his soon-to-be assassin. So I thought it was really interesting about how this intro started because usually when it comes to like an introduction for a Broadway musical, it has to be like grand, it has to be very optimistic and cheerful. Like if you were to see in various others, it has to be like that big show opener that everybody remembers. But what's here is that it's actually the complete opposite. It's actually much more quieter, and then it slowly starts building up into this big grandiose opening. And usually when it comes to these kind of introductions, it's always like the main character introducing themselves, and then we get to see the other characters. But here it's the complete opposite, in which the other characters are introducing him, and then he comes into the spotlight. So yeah, I think that what works here is that we get to see who the main characters are going to be in this. I mean, which is usual for a Broadway musical. You get to see all the characters come in all at once, and we get to know them tiny bit at a time. Like with Avenue Q, we talked about how in that one opening, we do get to see Kate Monster, Brian, Christmas Eve, Rod and Todd, and then we get to see Princeton. So it kind of works in a similar way in which, we get to see, his wife, Aaron Burr, his followers, and then eventually we get to see Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah, in regards to Hamilton, I mean, it doesn't really do anything different, I guess, from any other musical. It just introduce everybody, and then we just get into the plot. So I mean, it doesn't do anything unoriginal here, and but it definitely does. Well, yeah, not much else I got to say on that, really. So.
All right, so yeah, I guess nothing much to say about that. So let's go over to the next song, which is Aaron Burr, Sir. So this is when Hamilton meets up with Aaron Burr, John Lawrence, Marquis de Lafayette, and Hercules Mulligan. So they start talking to each other and they get to know each other a little bit. And Hamilton is just so passionate about like trying to change the country and trying to like break away from Britain, while Aaron is telling him, okay, you need to calm yourself down and you have to think about this in a calmer sense, because you're just getting way out of hand. That kind of stuff is going to get you killed. And then after the introduction, it moves over to the next song, which is My Shot, which this is when Hamilton is like really grandiose in this one, where he is telling him, I'm gonna stand up for my country because I believe in it. I think there's a lot of potential in there. I'm surrounded by young people who want to be able to change this world. And it's one of the more bigger songs in the musical, because it's everybody just like in the bar celebrating and having their strong independence. And this is basically where people are saying, okay, we're going to fight for our independence, and we're going to do all that we can so that we can be able to get our own country.
So yeah, I mean, like, another great song, and it really plays up to where we're going to be going up towards, and so it's very it has a lot of triumphalism in it as well. So it's I just think it's one of the better songs to keep the flow going. So
absolutely, yeah. So yeah, basically, the story goes on with their plans of war, and then finally we do get introduced to the Schuyler sisters. We get introduced to Angelica, Eliza, and Peggy, and then we have a song about them. And this is when Hamilton is introduced to the sisters, and then he eventually marries one of them. So there's this really interesting song that plays off during their wedding. So we have Angelica singing a song about how she was in love with Hamilton, even though that Hamilton married Eliza. So because both of them have very similar things in common, they're very passionate about the country, they're very passionate about their goals, and they can be a bit stubborn at times. Well, here's the thing, like, there were rumors that Hamilton and Angelica were dating at one point, and then he would eventually like cheat on her, but that's never been 100% confirmed. It's just been a rumor that was going on for hundreds of years. And I guess Lin-Manuel wanted to like play into this story. It's like, what would have happened if the rumors were true? What would have happened if Angelica really did have dreams about her and Hamilton together? So I mean, because she has it's kind of like a bit of a like a conflicting love triangle towards like the first act of the play, in which she is very happy for her sister because they have a really strong bond, and at the same time, she is marrying the man that she loves. And so we do get that song Satisfied, in which we have her recollecting about her and Hamilton meeting for the first time, and then eventually Hamilton meeting up with Eliza, and then they fall in love, and then they get married. And so not only is this a play about fighting for our freedom and for our independence, but it's also a bit of a tragic love story.
Well, yeah, like I mean, in regards to all the story elements that you need to work with, I mean, the more the merrier, I guess, in these types of situations, because you want to keep the flow going. I mean, if this whole thing was just going to be about like fighting against the British, then I think it was it was going to just kind of like have like a one stale thing currently going across the act. So I think introducing all these elements, I think, and keeping the audience engaged, I think, is probably was the wisest thing to do. And I get they're like just rumors and things like that, but for the sake of the show, like it's I think you're allowed a bit of creative liberty.
Yeah. Now, the one thing that I was actually kind of a little scared, especially since we did actually get to see this play on stage performed when we were in Miami, it was the scene in which when King George III came along, and I was kind of like afraid that maybe you would have been insulted or something, because
Why?
it's like, oh,
Like let me give you let me give everybody kind of like where I am in regards to like the whole America declaring independence from the British things. A lot of the places across the world when they have Independence Days, guess where they were declaring independence from? Us. Because we were such shitheads to so many people across the planet. And to this day, they still teach in these school books about, the British Empire and how things were, what they perceive as how things were. But really, in reality, we treated people terribly. So, this comical portrayal of King George, go for it, as far as I'm concerned, most of the people, the way that they portray the British, in the way that they do, a lot of it pretty much is 100% true. I mean, obviously not the singing and dancing and being a goof and everything like that. I mean, I don't know, obviously that was just done for comedic effect, but in regards to how awful we treated people during the times of Empire, I mean, that's pretty much well on the money, I think, in many aspects of the way that we treated people. So so as far as I'm concerned, if they want to, I think if that's the most insulting thing that they think they can do, I think they could go far worse, in my opinion. So if they ever did, I wouldn't blame them. So
sure. But it's actually really interesting because for us in history, we were taught about from our side of things, about how, we were able to gain our independence, and then afterwards we were slowly, building up towards our country. But I don't hear about from the British perspective. I mean, how did they feel when they lost the war and when they lost America as a country? What were you taught in schools?
Patricia, the fact that we have kids currently coming out of school that don't even know how to read and write, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm really surprised if any of them, even to the highest level ever hear about the American independence or anything like that. I think you have to go into a pretty specialist subject, I think, in regards to things like that. As far as we're concerned, we're always just kind of told how great the British were and things like that. It's almost like propaganda in a way. It's terrible what they teach kids in schools about this nowadays. So.
Sure. And to be fair, it's not like we don't have our fair share of propaganda ourselves. So, yeah. Anyway, but I just thought it was really interesting. Now, here's the thing, for history, of course, it's we know that all the defeats and, of course, with King George III's illness, I mean, it truly affected him. I would highly recommend that you would read a book called The Madness of King George III. And I think it was also adapted into a movie, from what I understand. But yeah, I think that it really just showcased towards almost towards his his old age, he was suffering from various things. I know that he was suffering from a condition where it made his urine turn blue, and he was going through like various anger issues, and he was just spouting out nonsense and stuff like that. So they thought that he was just going crazy when in reality he was like really sick. Another thing that people seem to overlook was that John Adams, when he was an ambassador for the United States, he actually went over to the UK and made peace with Britain so that they can be able to help them with, gaining resources so that they can be able to become a country. So, I mean, it's not like, it's like hate, hate, hate. I mean, until the War of 1812, but that's another can of worms right there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, continuing on with the story. So basically, the story just goes like you would expect, especially if you are familiar with history. So the Revolutionary War continues on, and there's the fight in Yorktown where the Americans won. And, pretty much the first act is just, all the way from like 1776 all the way up until 1783. And them fighting in the war. I mean, there's some other things that happen in between, like it's you have Aaron Burr getting married and his wife dies, and then he's writing a really sad story for his daughter called Dear Theodosia, where he's hoping that his daughter will grow and become happy, especially since he lost his wife. And John Lawrence, who gets killed in a duel, and then eventually, he went from being the aide to George Washington to being the Secretary of Treasury when George Washington becomes president. And then there's, the fact that Hamilton is constantly working for the president. He barely has any time for Eliza. And then Eliza's telling him, please, let us spend time with each other. I love you. Why do you have to keep going over to Washington? And why are you doing this? Because, he has a love for this country. And so
it's like, gee, yeah, it's like, it's not like you're establishing an entire nation or anything like that, It's like, it's
really complicated. You have to understand that, on the one hand, you have somebody who is feeling lonely because, it's like, all she has is her husband. I mean, she hasn't really seen too much of her sisters and her other family. And then, her husband is like gone off away. I mean, it's very similar to when I've read the story about Webster, in which, he had a passion for literature and for words that he spent like 25 years writing in his, writing every, 50,000 words in his dictionary. And he had barely any time to spend with his family. And he's like, I'm doing this because America, needs, American books and literature so that you can have it for schools. We need to get away from the British. And at the same time, it's like, I feel lonely because I want to spend time with you. I want to have a family with you and all that stuff. It's really complicated. It's like, what do you, sacrifice your life for? Do you sacrifice it for the people that you love or for your country?
Mm-hmm.
Which, nowadays, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, especially with everything that's going on. But again, that's...
Well, I mean, on top of that as well, people aren't actually, like, fighting to establish their own nations or anything like that, mind you, if things get... Well, I'm not going to bring that into anything, but, in regards to, all the emotions that are playing involved, and some of that as well, like, this is supposed to be, like, entertaining musical, and yet they bring in so much drama into all of it as well.
Sure. I mean, that's pretty much the first act. It's just like everything is just being established. And I remember that when we got to the second act, it was actually a lot more interesting because there was a lot more stuff going on. Like, this is when Thomas Jefferson becomes the ambassador to France. And this is when, he starts catching up with Hamilton, which they actually hated each other in real life. They almost had literally like nothing in common when it came to their own views. It's almost like the rivalry between Jefferson and Adams, except not as extreme because they really had a disagreement with pretty much everything until obviously the last years in their life, in which they were old men and they had long since retired. And then their wives died, and then they started like writing to each other for the past 10-15 years of them recollecting about everything that happened. And then them starting to have an agreement that even though that we were different, I had a strong respect for you. I mean, the last words from John Adams himself was Jefferson lives. And that's referring to that he is the last man who is alive that is holding on to the last old remnants of how they became a country, even though it was ironic because Jefferson died a few hours earlier, and they both died on the 4th of July, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the revolution, of the Declaration of Independence. But here, Hamilton and Jefferson did not like each other at all.
Yeah,
Like,
but I
not
think
even close.
as they do not like each other, I think as things go on, they start to kind of grow to kind of like respect one another in a way. So like it ends up being like this massive rivalry because they have two completely different ideas of what the future of where they live is supposed to go. But I think eventually, as time goes on, you get to see that it ends up kind of playing as like somewhat of a friendly rivalry in a way.
Yeah, I guess so. That's true. I mean, but I think that with history, it kind of was. But with this play, it's like it made it out like they really hated each other. But yeah,
Well,
I think that
you notice they played up the entire the kind of like the combat situation, if you will. So like they played it out like a rap battle. So like you think this was 8 Mile. When you really think about it. I mean,
I actually really did like that scene in which when Jefferson and Hamilton were kind of like duking it out, like if it was 8 Mile, it's like, my thoughts of this country is right. No, your thoughts of this country is wrong because of this reason, because of that reason. And both of them sound justified.
Thomas Jefferson sleeps with his mom.
Yeah, oh my god, that's true, yeah.
Yeah, but
anyway.
No, that didn't happen, by the way. That didn't happen, so...
Okay, no, but yeah, I mean, there's controversy with a whole bunch of things. With the side that Jefferson did own slaves and that he did have an affair with his slave, Sally Hemings, and they had 6 children together, and even still to this day, the descendants of Jefferson try to sweep it under the rug. And then there's also Hamilton's skeleton in the closet, in which he actually had an affair with somebody. Man. And this is the moment that Hamilton's reputation was ruined. Even though that he tried to like pay her off saying that it never happened, when they found out about it, everything just went downhill from there for him. He never could like get himself up again, even though that everybody else was able to get away with such far worse things like owning slaves like Jefferson and Washington did. But yeah, having an affair, especially if you are a man of power such as this, I mean, there's a reason why that Hamilton is not like revered compared to everybody else in the founding fathers.
Well,
lineup,
exactly,
so.
Yeah. When you kind of put the fact that he cheated on his wife as a pretty, I would say that's a pretty serious thing to put on the nose, if you will. Like, imagine having that. Forever and a day, put on yourself, and I mean, on top of that as well, like it totally ruins him. Like this guy, they portray him as like somebody who potentially could be president of the United States one day. And then all of a sudden that's just taken away from him.
He could have been, actually. Yeah, he could have been president of the United States. I mean, he had the potential to even be vice president because of everything that he'd done. I mean, he was the aide to Washington. He was the first treasurer. I mean, he could have been up there. But unfortunately, Aaron Burr was on the votes for being vice president multiple times, and Hamilton was not because of those because the fact that the fact that he cheated on his wife with somebody was released out to the public. So, yeah, I mean, his life could have been.
Oh, by the way, he released it himself. So, like, I mean, because eventually it was going to come out, so he pretty much, drove the knife into himself pretty much anyway. So, I mean, like, I guess you could say, mind you, can you really say that's an honorable thing for him to do? Like, I mean, the honorable thing for him to do would not have done it in the first place, but the fact that he had to publish his own admission to everybody that he'd done this.
I mean, like, what would you rather have it done? That you confess that you did something bad, or people finding out that you did something bad, you denying it, and then eventually you confess to it?
All right, I would say that probably the latter is worse. So.
Yeah, so at least he confessed that he did wrong. Yeah. And, I mean, and justifiably, his wife was so heartbroken and furious with him that, eventually she left him. And it was even worse.
Yeah, surprise.
Yeah, of course. Surprise. And it became even worse for their relationship when Philip, their son, was dead in a duel because he wanted to stand up for his father and for, his pride and his reputation. So, I mean, it made the situation even worse for them.
Mm-hmm. So, like, obviously there's that, there's so much emotion and so much drama currently going on in this, and, like, you're just so engaged in everything that's going on, like, I tell you what, the one thing I'll definitely say about Hamilton as an overall is that it's, every part of it's engaging Don't you agree? Like, like
Absolutely.
it craves to keep our attention. It introduces new story elements. It introduces in some cases new characters for like certain bits. In when it starts to go quiet, all of a sudden this new thing happens. Like it just it keeps this really good tempo going, and on top of that as well, the music's constantly playing up too. So like
Absolutely. Like the music is constant. It goes on and on and on. I mean, like here's the thing. Like the music is so constant in this musical. Like in some cases in which that were to be the case, and then there are some others in which like story is told. It's like you have a few minutes of music, and then the story continues on, and then you have some more music. But here it happens like really consistently. And you have like your quiet songs, you have your upbeat songs, you have your tragic songs. I mean, there's so many emotions that are going on when you see this. I mean, the scene in which when Philip dies, and then Eliza and Alexander are like crying for their son. It was like heartbreaking. And then it gets into an even more of a heartbreaking news in which when eventually Burr and Hamilton start with their duel, and then that countdown was just so great, in which it's like, 1, 2, and then the whole stage goes around in a circle. And then eventually when he's shot, and then everything just goes black, and then Hamilton is laying in bed dying while everybody's singing about how his life was just gone, and that Eliza was going to keep his legacy alive, and that she talked about like everything that she did after his death, in which she was able to help out orphans, and she was able to carry on her husband's name, even though that he did pretty much he pretty much like abandoned her, cheated on her, had her son killed. So, that was great for Eliza. I thought it was like a great redemption of what she did. And also, with Alex and with Burr, I think that he like regretted what he did, because I mean, you can tell from his performance that, ever since he shot his friend, his rival, his companion, that, he was never able to rest, knowing that, he essentially killed him. So, I mean, it just ends on a pretty sad note, but at the same time, it ends on a pretty satisfying note as well. So, again, I think that we're not doing our discussion justice. I really do think you need to see this for yourself in order for you to understand about the entirety of the story and the plot and the characters and the structure.
And if not, the songs are all on Spotify. So.
Yeah, that's true. I would suggest that you actually do. I mean, you could listen to the songs out of context. I was able to listen to a handful of songs out of context that, for example, I remember when the Channel Awesome incident happened, and we had Mars Girl singing, You'll Be Back, and as opposed to like, with King George III saying to his to America, you're going to be back. It was essentially like Mike Mishaud telling everybody from Channel Awesome, oh, you'll be back because you can't be famous without us. So yeah, but by the way, I would highly recommend you listen to that. That song is genius. But this play was actually hugely influential for everybody when it came out, especially if you remember during the presidential election, and during the time in which when Trump won, and that was when various Republicans, and I think even Mike Pence was even there watching the play, and he became insulted with it. And then the whole entire cast, including Lin-Manuel, had to explain to them that this is how history is, and he had to put him in his place, which I thought was just genius, by the way, because, the fact that they were insulted about like how, Hamilton was being presented to them is just hilarious.
Mm-hmm. And so, continue.
So, yeah, I think that another thing that I have to say when it comes to this play is that there's a reason why this play became hugely popular over the course of like 5 years, because not only is it a play that was able to bring a founding father back into mainstream media, but also it was able to bring in a different perspective. It's like, I remember when there was a bit of controversy. It's like, why was Thomas Jefferson and George Washington played by a black man? It's like, you want to see Martin Luther King played by a white man? So basically, I think they just missed the point entirely, that the whole play was supposed to be about what would the founding father story be like if it was told by today's America, where we're all more integrated and there's a lot more genre of music? I mean, you could have done like the traditional music and you could have had it played by white people. 1776 already did that. But the point that Lin-Manuel was trying to do was that it was trying to appeal to a much more broader audience, that anybody could be any of these characters. I mean, Manuel Miranda is Puerto Rican, and he played as Alexander Hamilton himself for a few years. So I didn't hear anybody complain about that.
Well,
So
yeah, I mean, like, on top of that as well, like, it's even more striking that it's actually played by, your everyday, mix of characters, because it kind of gives the feeling that, these types of scenarios, I mean, obviously ignoring all the historical context of that, but, the trials, the tribulations, the emotions, the things that these characters will go through, these could be us. They could be anybody, like in real life. I mean, obviously without the dueling and people shooting each other. I mean, obviously not without that. But I mean, like in regards to the struggles that you go through doing momentous tasks like what we have portrayed in front of us. Like, if anything, it kind of gives a sense of like, oh wow, and that's why one thing I actually felt inspired by this whole musical is the fact I feel like in a way I feel a little bit inspired by Hamilton because. It's him obviously in the most extraordinary of circumstances, and sometimes I look at some of the other characters as well and think, I wonder what I would be like if I was in that situation, or I wonder if I would be like in that situation. And when you have an engagement like that, when you have the audience, saying, oh wow, I wonder what happened if I was there when all of this was going on, that's the best place you could possibly be, because people are engaged with what you've got on the stage, and that's great.
Yeah. For people who were like upset about the controversies with like, oh, diverse cast, oh, they're singing about, they're telling the story of, this founding father in hip hop and rap, that didn't belong in 1776.
But because everyone else in the audience has been engaged in that culture and also part of that culture themselves. How dare you relate to your audience? How dare you? Oh my God.
I know that the controversy is stupid. So, yeah, I would suggest that.
What controversy? There is none. I mean, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I know, but for some people it is. But you know what? I'm not gonna get there. So yeah, overall,
if you're one of those people who have a problem with this musical based on that, that thing, just leave a comment down below, because I've been really intrigued to actually hear what your rationale of all of this is, really. I really would be.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you legit have, if you really have a problem with this, then please, let us know if you didn't like it because of the diverse cast or the music, or, oh, it's bringing up, history in this kind of sense that I don't like. It's like, I mean, just, we're curious if you do feel that way. Now, if you don't like the musical because, maybe you don't like musicals or you don't like history, I mean, that's fair, sure. But I would suggest that you do give it a chance. But overall, I think this is like one of the best musicals that came out in the last decade. I mean, people will be talking about this alongside with like other, Broadway musicals such as like Fan of the Opera and The Producers and various others. Like, people will be remembering this.
And by the way, if you're offended by Hamilton, by the diverse cast, but you're not offended by the Bible because of the same stupid reasons, let me tell you something. Most of those biblical characters, those biblical people, from a long time, they're actually Middle Eastern and not white. Shocker.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
What a shocker.
I know. So, for people who were, I don't hear any people insulted by, Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoats or, anything like that. So you do have a point. Yeah.
Or white Jesus.
Oh my goodness. Okay. But Aaron, Jesus was Jewish.
Yeah, well, doesn't necessarily mean that, he looks like an American from, from Louisiana.
Fair enough. Anyway, but yeah, we're just gonna leave it off there. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on by, Aaron. I really do appreciate
No
it.
problem, and here's the thing about this. Hamilton gives me a lot of hope now that the big, amazing musical is now back with us again. And I hope that, Louis Miranda goes off to do something else that's incredible, Like,
Well, from what I know, he's going to be adapting In the Heights into a movie, and it looks so good.
oh,
Now,
wow.
you have to understand, as somebody like me, I'm Hispanic, and I grew up in the streets of New York. Like, I can relate to this. Like, the fact that you have kids outside and right around Queens, and kids running around in the streets and playing with the fire hydrants and going over to the little markets because we didn't have like big supermarkets and surrounded by a Hispanic community. I related to that so much when I saw this. I am so excited for In the Heights.
hmm So yeah,
So I'm
until
yeah.
then, I think on top of that as well, even all the movie adaptations, here's the thing about this. I think we should bring this up because obviously with everything that's going on now, theaters are currently closed all over at the minute. So I say to everybody, once this starts to the Backstreet Boys reunion tour starts to kind of come to a close, I would just say to everybody, look, once the theaters start opening up again, it's safe to go back there again because you're not going to see a Backstreet Boy. Just go buy a ticket. Go enjoy a theatre experience because I'm sure everybody there and everybody who works really hard at those things and are going to want to keep going for the foreseeable future, and they could really use your support right now. So
Yeah, and Lin-Manuel has done excellent support for his community. You remember a few years ago when Puerto Rico was struck by that Hurricane Maria,
yeah,
and
he did that whole his relief thing, didn't he? And I'm
yeah,
trying to
he
remember.
did.
Yeah.
I mean, he had it, in Puerto Rico, and proceeds went over to help build schools and homes and get people back to normal in Puerto Rico because it was a
Well,
disaster.
on top of
Like,
that as well, it was also something who went to pay down its national debt as well. So, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't owe as much money now so its economy can breathe. So,
exactly.
yeah, so
Yeah.
he's
So
done a lot of good.
yeah, he's done, just as much good as anybody could have done, as opposed to, a certain person who just threw, sheets of, like rounds of paper towels to people. I'm not gonna say any more than that, but anyway, but yeah, that's it for this podcast. So, Aaron, plug and promote your stuff.
Okay, so if you want to find me on Facebook, it's facebook.com/Arun Mehta Show. That's ARUNMEHTASHOW. If you want to find me on Twitter, it's also at Arun Mehta Show. And if you want to find me on Tumblr and ask me a question, it's arunmeta.tumblr.com. And if you want to find me on Instagram, it's also Arun Mehta Show. And also, hopefully we'll be doing Twitch again, so Arun Mehta Show's on Twitch as well. So cool.
Okay. You can find me on YouTube, youtube.com/old school lane, facebook.com/old school lane. I'm on Twitter, Patty_B_Miranda. You can find my podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, Overcast, all those places. I post new episodes of the podcast there first, and then it'll go up on a few days on YouTube. So thank you so much for listening, everyone. Let us know in the comments below about your thoughts on Hamilton. How did you first get introduced to it? Did you see it on Broadway, or when it was on national tour or international tour? Or are you seeing this for the first time on Disney Plus? What is your favorite song on Hamilton? And let us know about the cultural influence that Hamilton brought in that you think was very important. And for the people who were like insulted for what we said about our thoughts on politics, I just want to say I'm here at Old School Lane, we try our very best to kind of be neutral at these things, but when it comes to things that we care about, like in terms of like talking for the people, especially with everything that's been going on, then I'm sorry if you were insulted by it. But especially with a play like Hamilton, it's kind of hard to not
Well,
go
actually, tell
around
you
that.
what, while we're on that subject, can I remind everybody that when the election happened in 2016, Mike Pence got a dressing down from the lead actor who played Hamilton at the time. So, saying that he was concerned about the way that the country was going. So, as far as we're concerned, I mean, if they're okay doing that, then I can't see why we're not okay doing that.
Okay, that's fair, but Yeah, I just wanna clear the air. That's all I want to do.
Okay.
All right then. So thank you so much for listening, everybody. Hope to see you around soon, and take care.
And remember, everybody, there are better ways to settle your differences than dueling with pistols. So please do not take that away from Hamilton. So
Yes,
thank you.
please don't. Okay. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.